This 4 o'clock hour, Nicole Auerbach, theathletic.com. She hasn't had a lot to write about, huh? With college athletics, college sports, and so much. You just look at her feed. Nicole Auerbach on Twitter joins us on 365 Sports. These last couple of years, I know you've always been busy, but these last couple of years and even the last couple of days, it just seems like it's nonstop for stories that you have to write.
Yeah, it's definitely been that way. I mean, at least dating back to the off season of 2020, but maybe even a little bit before that. I mean, the off seasons have just been just as busy, if not busier, than the seasons for college football. And obviously, a big part of that's realignment, but also NIL, everything that's come around with that, and just so many changes taking place at the NCAA level. But yeah, even rules changes today, starting the clock faster after a first down. Like, there's always something happening, and it's never quiet.
Nicole, being embedded essentially with the Infractions team and then getting to talk to Charlie Baker at length like you did, what was the last that whole experience like, and kind of immersing yourself in what has been the NCAA and what they hope will be the NCAA?
Yeah, it was very interesting to go to a Committee on Infractions meeting, and that was just over a week ago in Las Vegas. And, it's kind of this, like, monolith. You hear the words, you don't really know exactly who the people are and what they're doing. And a lot of people think that the enforcement staff, like the people investigating violations, are the same people who dole out the punishment, two different groups. So it was very interesting to be with them and just kind of humanize them and see them as all of these different people who work in college sports for different reasons and volunteer all of this time, reading thousands of pages for hearings, because they do believe that there should be some fairness and some rules that are followed, even though they understand that, like, everyone's got different budgets, everyone's got different priorities. So I think that really came through. Is like, no one's trying to hammer schools or get people in trouble. And they're also really looking for a lot of cooperation right now because, this stuff is hard. You don't have subpoena power. And there's, you're coming out of, like, this IARP process, which is different from the COI. And, everyone's complaining it took so long. And, it was very, like the lawyers and the schools, everyone was very confrontational during that, and they want to go back to cooperation. And so you saw this, like, with the Miami women's basketball ruling, which came out right after I was with that committee. And, that was a negotiated deal that Miami and their head coach agreed upon violations, agreed upon the penalties. And it was, a slap on the wrist, right? It didn't disassociate their booster. The school was able to self-impose some penalties. And it really wasn't that bad. The players involved weren't penalized either. And so I think that that's what you're looking for in the future. And they're also very interested to see, just like all of us are, about when you change the standard on an NIL violation. If you have this NIL presumption, which took effect on January 1st, and so there's still some cases that are going to be processed like before that. But in that world, you're essentially saying, like, we're presuming a violation has occurred, and the school has to produce evidence to show that they followed the rules or their boosters followed the rules. So flipping that on its head is going to be very interesting as well. And again, you're going to need that cooperation from the people you're accusing of violating the rules. So that piece is going to be very interesting. And it's similar, my conversation with Charlie Baker, the new NCAA president. NIL was like the number one thing he wanted to talk about, and the number one thing that people have been talking to him about. And it was interesting because a couple weeks ago at the NCAA convention, when I first got to meet him in person, he was talking a lot about Congress, right? And his background in government and relationships and getting stuff done, and Congress helping out, helping set a national standard. And it seems in the passing weeks that he now believes that there are ways for the NCAA to impose some rules, or he was talking a lot about transparency, consumer protections. And it just sounded like he believes, and that there's enough people in the NCAA who believe that, like, they need to put some rules around this stuff. And if they get further challenged in courts, like, it's worth the fight, because this is something that they need to really try to fight for fairness, to not have NIL as recruiting inducements and those pieces. So it's just very interesting because the conversations around NIL have changed so much over the 18, 19 months that it's existed, but they just kind of even change month to month based on what people are trying to do or what like inventive strategy some boosters or a collective have done as well. And that's just a continuing evolution.
So, Nicole, your Q&A with Charlie Baker is really great. There's a lot of good information and answers in there. And part of it, you're discussing the fact that, clearly the NCAA would like Congress to step in and help them out in some of these cases. But there's the reality like, hey, that might not happen. There's also a lot on their plate that's a lot bigger and more important than college athletics. And he seems to understand that. And there's obviously, as you pointed out, there's been a lot in the news and headlines and talking in front of Congress and not seemingly going the way of the NCAA. So where do they kind of feel like they sit right there? And what's next ahead for them as far as that goes, trying to help shape a brighter future that maybe will have some life rafts thrown their way?
Yeah, I think life rafts is a good way to describe it because, for the last few years, whenever anyone says, like, we need help from Congress, they are asking for a life raft, right? They're asking for the ability to create rules around athlete compensation that they worry would be violating antitrust law or other issues right now because of, the legal environment. So that's part of it. Are you asking, can you get something narrowly done, or could you get something done that's just NIL specific and it doesn't take on other aspects of the collegiate athletic universe? And depending on who you talk to, the more confident they are, right? And I think we've seen different proposals and different bills from both sides of the aisle. And some of that is just political posturing, right? And some of that's from push from people who don't really understand how these things work right now. But anytime I talk to anyone and, would kind of toss out that conversation of like, yeah, do you really think Congress, like, A, would prioritize this enough, but B, would actually be motivated to do something? In the last year, they did say, like, okay, well, let's see how the midterms go. And then coming out of the midterms, maybe that's the timing. So that's where some of the optimism comes from, like, this year. Could there be something done this year now that you're through an election cycle? But again, the question would be, like, is it going to be NIL specific? Is it going to create, or kind of carve out some other things for the NCAA? And then what about these lawsuits anyway? I mean, these are the Johnson case, which is the one that had oral arguments a few weeks ago. That could upend the model itself as well. And so one of the things that I think about with NIL is all of the issues that everyone gets worked up about right now may not be issues in 5 or 10 years if you have a different business model and schools or conferences are paying athletes more directly. Then it's almost like this is this is a step towards something and it wasn't the end destination. So it's also possible that some of this stuff changes the need for some of the things that people are asking for around NIL, because if the money flows in a different way or can be direct and, not as many third parties, collectives, et cetera, then that's a whole different conversation. So you still have those pressures from the legal environment and a couple of different court cases that are working their way through, and the National Labor Relations Board in California as well. So you kind of have like these 4 different outside pressure points, Congress being one for sure, and that's one, again, that they think can help them potentially. But you have the Johnson case, you have the House lawsuit, which is related to NIL and kind of like the idea of like collective bargaining and rights and revenue sharing, and then that NLRB unfair labor practice charge as well. So there's 4 different things right now that, again, I know it's not like the sexiest thing for fans to pay attention to, but these are all 4 massive deals, and they could impact the way that like the business model of college sports works.
Did you see I guess there was a note from the NCAA infractions about with what A&M is doing, and they say what they're doing is fine, but the connection with the 12-man fund plus, have you heard anything about, we need to look into this a little bit more?
Well, I think that's essentially what they're doing. They were told, and the NCAA has told me this too. I mean, they were told that A&M was going to be making an announcement. They did not sign off on it. Like, they did not vet it and say, like, this is legal before Texas A&M announced it. So I think that's the process. Like, you don't have enough information to know if that is within the rules or not. And so I think that what they're doing is trying to, it's not exactly a warning shot. It's just saying, like, this is something we need to vet. Because, again, as I was saying, like, everything has evolved so quickly. I think, when you sat there on July 1st, 2021, we didn't know what collectives were. We didn't know the phrase. We didn't know how they were going to be set up. But it's like one person tries, one fan base or booster group tries something, and then if there is an immediate pushback, then others are going to duplicate it and others are going to copy it. And so I think what the NCAA is trying to communicate is to be careful about that because it's not fully vetted. And again, I just think it's so new that if you're the NCAA, you still need to collect a lot more information before you can decide, where it stands in terms of, permissibility. But we also are in a different world now where like they are trying to crack down on this. And for a lot of people, I'll believe it when I see it. But, this could be an area if they get more information and they decide to try to make make a statement. This could be one of those areas because the problem, what they're trying to do right now, and this is another thing I picked up in my conversations over the last week, was they're trying to punish the adults in the room, not the kids. So they're not going to, I would be shocked if in any of these circumstances related to NIL or investigations, or if they try to, tell people do this or don't do this, I would be shocked if we see players get penalized for their behavior. They want to change the behavior from the schools, from the boosters, from the third parties. So that's really where the focus area is going to be. And even with the Miami decision, which again, John Ruiz, their mega booster, like he was not punished, he was not disassociated. They still put a warning on top of the decision saying like, hey boosters, don't take this as a precedent. We're still prepared to disassociate people and not let you go to home games and not let you be associated with the athletic department. So they haven't done it yet, right? They haven't had a major decision or a major ruling or anything that has really, instilled fear in other people. But I think they're trying to send out little messages about behavior that they're concerned about, that they need to look into more, and potential penalties that they have. But I do not think that the A&M situation is resolved yet because, again, I just think it's so new that they don't have all of the information to okay it or say it's not okay.
But without congressional intervention, though, they do run up against the problem. I mean, look, for example, sports betting's been technically illegal after a Supreme Court case for several years now, and not every state has passed it, and the federal government is kind of waiting for all 50 states to make their decision before they regulate it across the board. And then if you have a situation like Miami that, yeah, they got popped for something, but essentially Florida passed a law less than a week later that said, well, now we can let the university facilitate with some of these NIL companies. So while specifically what John Ruiz in Miami did would still maybe not be against the rules, they've created a loophole around it. So how does the NCAA even keep ahead of that? Because if 12-man plus becomes legal in the state of Texas, then they really couldn't do anything about it.
This goes back to your first point about Congress, right? Like when people, including like, Greg Sankey, SEC commissioner, when people are saying like, hey, we need, the federal help to create a national standard, it's not necessarily, about the NCAA rules, but it is about what different states are doing, right? They're the ones pushing the boundaries. And if you think back all the way back to California's bill, which eventually led to NIL, right? And all these other states rushed to pass things, and then they moved up the effective dates. But all of that was from a state perspective. And so that's where when you say we need federal help, we need national standards, it's to supersede the state laws. And that's for that exact reason. So that is a good question and not exactly sure. I mean, one example that I keep coming back to, you mentioned sports gambling, but like what about like the legalization of marijuana? That has been state by state as well. But the NCAA and professional sports organizations, but the NCAA still has drug testing policies. So even in states where that is legal, they can still set a rule that says that you can't test positive. So there are things when you're a membership organization where you're opting in to abide by rules that are not necessarily like the legal standard in your state. So what's different about this? Like I've asked that question. I've gotten kind of different answers. It feels different. It feels more tenuous because of, the Supreme Court ruling against the NCAA, because of these different lawsuits who are worried about, what you're able to do legally. But it's not that different than saying, well, we have these drug testing standards, even though you're allowed to technically do that in your state and it's not breaking the state law, we can still have a national rule from the NCAA or a conference rule that you're opting into our organization and you're going to adhere to. So that's where it's like, I don't know. I mean, we're certainly going to see some of these situations come to a head, and I'm sure we'll see lawsuits and we'll see people push on some of these situations. But that's the crux of it. I don't know what the outcome would be, and that's why people are saying when they want that life draft in Congress, that's what they're asking for. They're asking to make that simpler.
One more thing, Nicole, and thanks for your time and a bunch of articles you've been writing about a lot of great things in college athletics that need to be straightened out or that people need to know more about. You also wrote the story about Gonzaga, that they would get a bigger piece of the pie based on success in the postseason. Of course, Gonzaga's name's been brought up even by the Big 12 and Brett Yormark as a possible, another one of those, maybe we change and get bigger that way. But there is unequal revenue sharing based on postseason success. Mm-hmm. Do you think you'll ever see that in football?
It's an interesting question. I worked on a piece with my colleague Andy Staples this week about the ACC, right? This is a big topic over there about, Florida State and Clemson and others saying, hey, we're more valuable than some of our peers. We should make more. And a natural evolution of that conversation would be, hey, the college football playoff is about to expand. What if you make more based on how far you go in the playoff? And that's essentially what the deal that Gonzaga struck with the WCC was. And it's always important to keep in mind with any of these conversations, like you need to have leverage. So in that situation, Gonzaga was coming off a run to the national title game and had an opportunity to go to the Mountain West. And so that's the question with FSU and Clemson, all these people that are locked into this long-term deal in the ACC is like, without an offer in hand, do you have leverage? Probably not. But the way that the WCC did it, I thought was very interesting, and it's not going to work everywhere. But because they needed to keep Gonzaga, what they agreed to was they changed some scheduling things as well, and they changed the way that they structured their conference tournament to really protect the top seeds, which is why Gonzaga is not going to be playing, I don't think, until Sunday or Monday.
Right.
And their tournament is underway. But what they did was, the further you go in the NCAA tournament, the more of the money you get to keep. We know that you get a tournament unit for making the tournament and for advancing each round. So they basically, Gonzaga got to keep more of that unit the further they went in the tournament. So then they could reinvest that money in themselves. And so therefore, I was talking to, she's now the Mountain West commissioner, but she's WCC commissioner, Gloria Navarez, and she said, you're eating what you kill. You're not spreading it around. And so this is what the story ended up doing, because we've seen some of these other programs emerge, was it actually lit a fire under people, because they were like, well, we're not going to be able to coast on Gonzaga's coattails. We need to invest in basketball, get there ourselves, and earn some money for ourselves. But it's just an interesting dynamic and way of looking at this as we're talking about unequal revenue sharing. And we're in a time where everyone is so focused on doing what is best for their individual school and individual campus, which is part of the reason we've seen these moves in realignment. And you've seen people publicly asking for more money in the ACC. You got to do you. You got to protect yourself in the present and the future. So it is going to be an interesting conversation about how this new expanded college football playoff revenue is going to work, because we already know that the Big Ten and the SEC, if you do the math over the last 9 years, they would have sent the most teams. So are they going to ask and fight for, I assume, yes, more money in the revenue sharing from the contract itself when the contract goes up in 2026? But also, again, even in individual conferences, are they going to look at how that money is going to get sent out? Should it go again, using the ACC as an example, the programs that invest the most in football and are, going to carry the flag for the ACC and in the postseason, should they get more? And you could do it the way that the WCC did it with Gonzaga. But again, you need to have leverage to have that type of conversation and to actually get what you want. But that will be a fascinating question. And something that each league will ultimately have to decide, because it's not a entirely new revenue stream, but it is going to be new revenue coming into all of these leagues, and they could change the way that they hand it out.
Nicole, I'm telling you, you've written a bunch, and I know you got more to do. It's a great follow on Twitter at Nicole Auerbach, The Athletic, which we always have talked about, with great writers. Max Olson earlier today as well with that story with Stuart Mandel. Nicole, thank you very much for your time. Enjoy your weekend. You probably deserved a little bit of a chance to take a break.
I appreciate that. Have a good one.
You too. Man, that's a lot. My goodness, that's a lot.
She just gave a TED Talk, too.
Huh?
She just gave a TED Talk, too.
Yeah. I mean, that is a lot. Larry Pilgrim, by the way.